They say death is the end of all suffering, but for me, my husband's death was only the beginning of a truth far more horrifying. The man I mourned for 3 long weeks was never dead. He simply vanished with his mistress, leaving me to drown in a fabricated grief. But what he didn't know was that from those ashes I forged strength out of sorrow. And this is the story of how I gave him back everything he gave me, drop by drop, piece by piece, despair for despair. Chapter 1, The Bodiless Death and the Confession in the Coffin. There are moments in life you can never forget, not because they're beautiful, but because they shatter everything you ever believed was real. I remember exactly that it was a Tuesday, the clock striking 3:47 p.m. Not because anything special happened, but because I was staring at the kitchen clock, counting the minutes, until I could allow myself to pour a glass of wine without feeling guilty about drinking in the middle of the afternoon. It had been 3 weeks since Michael's memorial service. I still wasn't used to calling him my late husband, barely even convinced I was living in this reality. Each day passed as if I were submerged underwater, everything blurred, hazy, and silent. Then the phone rang. A strange voice came through on the other end. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Gerald Henderson from Peaceful Rest Crematorium. I need to speak with you about your husband's arrangements." A strange tightening seized my chest. There was a tremor in his voice, not the sympathetic kind, but the kind people have when they're holding a secret too big. I'm not ready to receive the ashes," I replied, trying to stay calm. "We already agreed on that." He hesitated. "Ma'am, I think it would be better if we met in person. There's something rather unusual." 20 minutes later, I was in his office. A soulless, cold white place littered with brochures about grief funeral counseling and eternal rest. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was thinking about a man I believed was dead in a room dedicated to handling the dead. Mr. Henderson sat across from me, constantly adjusting his tie, just like Michael whenever he was about to announce we'd overspent. "Mrs. Patterson," he began, hands shaking as he flipped through a file. "I've done this job for 32 years, and I've never encountered anything like this." I held my breath. "When we prepared to cremate your husband, we discovered the coffin was empty." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" I asked, though something inside me had already started to feel terribly wrong. "There was no body inside," he said, then slid a pale yellow slip of paper toward me. "There was only this." I recognized Michael's handwriting immediately, the soft, slightly slanted script I'd seen on birthday cards, grocery lists, and the little notes he'd stick on the refrigerator. 15 years of marriage flashed through me in an instant. I touched the paper as if it might explode. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Dearest Rebecca." It took me 3 readings to absorb what Michael had written. The confession wasn't meant for me, but for another woman, the woman he loved. The woman he was going to run away with. He wrote that, while I was grieving, believing myself a widow, he and Rebecca, the young secretary at the dental office, would be starting a new life. Everything had been arranged, the transfers, the fake death, the siphoning of assets, even his mother's house, where I now assume they're living as husband and wife. Michael even emphasized that I never paid attention to finances, that I wouldn't question him moving all the assets, that I would wail and go on in a stupor while they went on to live the life we deserve. My whole body went cold. I had held a funeral for a man who wasn't dead. I had wept for someone still alive. I had collapsed over a person who was quietly watching me suffer and smirking at how perfect their plan was. But they forgot one thing. I am not as stupid as they think. Chapter 2. When pain becomes clarity. For 3 weeks, I lived as a widow. 3 weeks of pitiful hugs, casserole dishes from neighbors, and the same hollow reassurances, time heals all wounds. But in one single afternoon, everything I believed in disintegrated. The man I once loved wasn't dead. He had simply erased me from his life like an extra digit in an equation so he could start over with his mistress. The first feeling I had wasn't rage. It was numbness. I couldn't even cry. My tears had dried up during that fake funeral. But the more I reread that letter, the numbness began to shift into something else. Something sharp, cold, like the blade of a knife resting in the center of my palm. Michael thought I'd stay blind forever, that I would sit in that house living out the rest of my days, clinging to fake ashes and empty condolences. But his arrogant confidence gave me the most dangerous weapon of all evidence. I carefully folded the letter and slipped it into my handbag. Then I smiled. For the first time in weeks, my lips curled upward, not from joy, but from the realization that I was no longer the loser in his game. The next day, I went to our family lawyer's office. Robert Caldwell had worked with us for over a decade. He looked at me with mournful eyes, still convinced I was the grieving widow. "Miss Sandra, I know this is difficult," he said gently, "but we need to begin the transfer process. Michael's estate now legally belongs to you." I nodded softly, dabbing my eyes with a tissue like the model widow. Inside, I listened to every word like a detective. Real estate, investment accounts, insurance policies, even his mother's house, the very place where Michael and Rebecca were now playing house. Robert explained every document, every figure, and with each word I was laying the bricks of my foundation. Michael believed I was blind to money, but fate, in its twisted irony, had handed me everything, all thanks to his fake death. On my way out, I stopped in front of a glass panel reflecting my image. The woman in the mirror still wore black, still looked like the poor widow in everyone's eyes. But in those eyes, a different fire had begun to burn. I was no longer the one abandoned. I was the one holding all the cards. Michael had plotted every detail, but he forgot one crucial thing. He made himself a dead man on paper. And the one who survived was me. From that moment on, the pain in my heart morphed into a cold kind of power. I made a vow to myself I wouldn't just take back what was mine. I would make him pay for every single tear I had shed. Chapter 3: The Investigation and the Seizure of Assets. I began my performance as the fragile, grieving widow. Every furrowed brow, every sigh, every dab of the tissue was part of the act. But in my mind, the details of Michael's assets were being rearranged like puzzle pieces in a crime scene. Robert the lawyer handed me a thick stack of files. "We need to transfer everything under Michael's name to you, Sandra. Properties, land bank accounts, stocks, everything. You will officially be the sole heir." I feigned a shaky sigh. "Oh, I didn't know he had so much. I just want to get through this pain." But inside I was memorizing every number, every address with razor-sharp clarity. 3 rental buildings in nearby districts, scattered investment accounts in several financial firms, and most important, the house that belonged to my mother-in-law, Dorothy, the one I was now certain Michael and Rebecca were hiding in. As I listened to Robert speak, a bitter truth settled in. Throughout our years of marriage, Michael had lived a double life. He didn't just betray my heart, he betrayed me financially. The rental income he'd never mentioned in our budget talks. The investment accounts I'd never even heard of. All hidden from me as if I were some clueless child, too stupid to understand. But now everything was in my hands. That day I left the office with artificially reddened eyes, but my steps were steadier than ever. I had not only the assets, but the legal authority to reshape the entire game. That evening, I drove past my mother-in-law's house. The last time I'd been there was during her funeral. A small 2-story home nestled beneath the oak trees. But this time I noticed the change's new curtains. A warm light spilling from the living room. Freshly tended garden beds. Someone was living there. I sat in my car, heartbeat calm but steady. A figure passed behind the upstairs window, then another. I didn't need to see their faces. I knew who it was. Michael and Rebecca. They thought they were safe, thought they'd erased me from their lives. I laughed quietly in the dark. How ironic that their secret hideaway, the house Michael thought was the safest asset, was now legally mine. He may have believed he planned everything perfectly, but in truth, he handed me everything on a silver platter, and I, the woman he once dismissed, the one he called clueless about money, I would use every last bit of it to destroy him. That night, for the first time, I slept deeply. No tears, no haunting memories. I began to dream of the next step. Michael believed he was in control of the chessboard, but really he'd only made the opening moves. As for me, I held the queen in my hand. Chapter 4. The Reveal. Silent Surveillance. The next day, I put my plan into motion. All I had to do was continue playing the role of the exhausted widow, trying her best to take care of her late mother-in-law's house. I called a private security company. My voice was soft, tinged with just enough sorrow as I spoke to the customer service rep. My husband just passed, and then my mother-in-law too. I've just inherited her old house. I need to feel safer, just in case strangers try to get in. The woman on the other end responded with polished sympathy. Within a day, their technical team arrived on site to change all the locks and install a full 360-degree surveillance system directly connected to my phone. I didn't show up in person. I claimed I was still too heartbroken to face it and asked them to handle everything themselves. But the truth was, I'd planned it perfectly. Based on what I'd observed earlier, I knew the afternoons were when Michael and Rebecca usually went out shopping. And just as I'd predicted, the house was empty when the crew did the work. That afternoon, when I opened the monitoring app on my phone, my heart pounded with anticipation. Every corner of the house, every room from the front door to the backyard was now in my sight. That house was no longer Michael's hideout. It was my stage. That night around 8:30 p.m., I saw headlights flash across the front gate, the blue sedan I'd seen Rebecca drive. They stepped out, Michael holding the same familiar key, walking up to the front door. He inserted the key, turned, nothing. Tried again, harder, still nothing. I could see the confusion on his face through the infrared camera. Rebecca stood beside him, arms crossed, beginning to scowl. They tried the back door, the windows circling the house like strangers. And me, I sat on my sofa, sipping wine, watching it all unfold on my phone screen. In that moment, I understood something. Deeply, Michael thought he'd turned me into a grieving, powerless widow. But the truth was, he was now the one locked out, excluded from what he thought was his new paradise. They called a locksmith. I saw Rebecca waving her arms, clearly arguing with him. Michael looked around, face tight with stress. They had no idea that every move, every twitch of their eyebrows was being witnessed by me. A new kind of pleasure surged in my chest. This wasn't pain anymore. This was power. That night, Michael couldn't step foot inside his own mother's house, and I knew this was just the prelude. The following day, I moved on to phase 2. I called the city's property management office and reported that I had just inherited a house and wanted to request a full inspection electrical plumbing infrastructure. They scheduled it immediately. I imagined Michael and Rebecca scrambling to clean to hide things when inspectors knocked on the door some unexpected morning. Just the thought of it thrilled me. Michael had always believed he was in control, but now every heartbeat, every second of his life was in the palm of my hand. And I knew starting today I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was the hunter. Chapter 5. Strike by Strike. Ever since the surveillance system went live, I was no longer the outsider. I was the sole audience to a tragicomedy Michael and Rebecca performed daily, unaware that every gesture, every argument, every furrowed brow was unfolding right before my eyes. But just watching wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the pressure, layer by layer, strike by strike, not through violence, not through shouting, but through the cold, legal weapon of ownership. I started with the simplest things: electricity, water, gas. I called each utility company with the trembling voice of a widow who had just lost her husband and mother-in-law. I told them I wasn't in a stable state to manage the property yet and wanted to temporarily cut services to the inherited house. Every customer service rep responded with sympathetic efficiency. No one questioned me. 2 days later, I watched from my phone as Michael flipped a light switch. Nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. His brows tightened. Rebecca turned on the kitchen faucet. Dry. She tried the shower next and shrieked in frustration when only a dry hiss escaped the pipes. That night, I watched them fumble with flashlights and light candles. They thought they were building a secret nest, but they looked more like fugitives squatting in an abandoned house. I smiled. This was only the beginning. A few days later, I called the city's inspection department. I reported that I had inherited an old property and needed a full assessment to determine if it was safe to rent or sell. They were eager to help. I even added, neighbors mentioned strangers going in and out. I think it might be someone watching the house, but I'm not sure. One morning, I saw through the cameras as Michael and Rebecca scrambled across the house the moment inspectors knocked. They stuffed clothes into bags, shoved bottles under the sink, and bolted out the back like common thieves. The inspectors roamed from room to room, snapping photos, taking notes, while the two of them hid behind the garden shed, like children caught doing something very wrong. Every time I sat on my sofa, savoring each sip of wine as I watched it all unfold, they flinched at every knock, and I enjoyed every second of it. I didn't stop there. I called the sanitation office, expressing my concern about suspicious waste buildup at a supposedly empty property. Another inspection followed, and each time it sent Michael and Rebecca into a panic cleaning, fleeing like guilty criminals. Day by day, I watched them unravel. Rebecca snapped more often. Michael grew silent and heavy. The house they once saw as a secret paradise had transformed into a prison, without bars, a place where someone could knock at any moment, where even basic utilities had vanished. They had no idea I was the puppeteer behind it all. Working remotely, with nothing but a few legal phone calls and the illusion of weakness. Michael once believed he had made me powerless, but now, step by step, layer by layer, I was turning him into a man, rotting away in fear and helplessness. And I knew. This was only the warm-up. The final blow was yet to come. Chapter 6, The Fateful Call. 3 months after the day I received that call from the crematorium, my phone rang again. An unknown number, no name, no contact saved. My heart pounded without reason. A strange instinct told me this call would change everything. I answered, "Zandra, please don't hang up. It's me." Michael's voice. Hoarse, urgent trembling. A chill ran through me. For 3 months, I had only seen him in grainy black and white footage from surveillance cameras. Hearing his real voice again felt like a ghost had phoned from the afterlife. "I don't know who you are. My husband is dead." I spoke slowly, each word sharp like a blade. "It's me, Zandra. I need to talk to you. There's trouble at my mother's house. Paperwork confusion, the utilities. There's a for sale sign on the lawn. I think someone is trying to mess with us." Us. The word rolled off his tongue as if I were still his ally. As if I knew nothing. I stayed silent, letting him stumble through the narrative he'd crafted, hoping to salvage it. Then softly I said, "You're mistaken. That house is mine. I inherited it from my mother-in-law. What I choose to do with it is my right." There was a long, jagged pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing short and uneven. "Zandra, you know everything." I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence press against him like a sentence passed. Then gently I said, "Michael, I know everything. I know you faked your death. I know about Rebecca. I know about the letter in the coffin. And I know you two have been squatting in that house like thieves for months." He choked on air. His voice cracked. How could you possibly know?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. One phone call from the crematorium said it all. And your ridiculous little letter, that was the perfect evidence. Did you really think I'd stay in the dark forever? You were wrong. In the distance, I heard Rebecca shouting. Furious, screeching. "You said she didn't know anything. You said she was clueless, and now look, they started arguing. Rebecca's voice rising into shrill panic, Michael stammering, begging. I sat calmly listening to their fake romance implode over the phone. You said she'd never understand financial documents. You said she'd cry, fall apart, and give up. You said... She was stupid, Rebecca screamed. I cut in my voice icy. He was wrong. And now I'll tell you what's happened. Listen carefully, Michael. I began to read my list point by point like an unshakable indictment. Electricity, water, gas, all cut. Bank accounts all transferred to my name. Credit cards canceled because the account holder is legally dead. Phone disconnected, no service. The house locks changed, cameras installed, listed for sale. Real estate and investments legally mine. And you, Michael, on paper, you're dead. And the dead have no rights. I could hear his breathing break apart each sentence of mine, choking the air from his lungs. You can't do this. Half of that's mine. I cut him off. Razor-sharp dead men don't own anything, Michael. You made yourself a ghost. And now you're living like one in hiding, broke, considered a trespasser in what you thought was your sanctuary. There was a sob on the other end. I didn't know if it was his or Rebecca's, maybe both. I lowered my voice, but each word still sliced clean. You have 48 hours, 2 days. Pack your things and disappear. After that, I'm calling the police to report unlawful trespassing. Explain it to them however you'd like. Zandra, please. I have nothing left. Rebecca lost her job. We have nowhere to go. Perfect, I said, my tone sharp as glass. You're starting from zero, just like you wanted. Only this time, no money, no property, no legal identity. Congratulations, you're free. Free to be a ghost. And then I hung up. I set the phone down, feeling an unfamiliar calm settle over me. For the first time in months, I no longer felt like the betrayed woman. I was the one in control. And Michael, the man who once mocked me as clueless, was now nothing more than a desperate phantom in the twisted game he thought he could win. Chapter 7, The End and Rebirth. 2 days after the call, I sat in front of my phone screen, eyes fixed on the surveillance feed. At exactly 2:17 a.m., headlights swept across the front of the house. Rebecca was driving the familiar blue sedan. Michael sat in the passenger seat, his posture hunched, the figure of a defeated man. They hurriedly carried bags of clothes and a few small boxes. No luxury suitcases, no proud lifted chins. Just two people fleeing, clutching the remnants of a rotting fantasy. I watched in silence. No tears, no sympathy. As they shut the trunk, I saw Michael glance back at the house. His head-bowed shoulders collapsed. He understood this house was no longer his. Nothing was. Rebecca slammed the car door shut, not even looking at him. I saw the anger, the resentment etched into every movement. All the sweet lies Michael once whispered had evaporated into ash. At 2:43 a.m., the car pulled off the street and disappeared from the screen. The house fell into stillness again. And this time the silence belonged to me. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt weightless. I had turned my pain into a weapon, my loss into victory. I had taken back everything, and more than that, I had reclaimed myself. In the weeks that followed, I began restoring the house. Fresh paint, new floors, a tended garden. I erased every trace of Michael and Rebecca. Every stain, every rotting memory was wiped clean. The house came back to life brighter, more beautiful than ever. When the new tenant moved in, a sweet young teacher, I felt an odd sense of joy. The house that once symbolized betrayal was now a source of life income and, most of all, independence. People began to see me differently. Neighbors no longer whispered pity but offered admiration. Robert, the lawyer, praised my composure. Even the real estate agent remarked that I had handled the situation with flawless precision and chilling calm. And me. I realized I had changed. I was no longer the dependent wife, no longer the underestimated one. I was the woman who dismantled the trap, stood up, and won. Michael faked his death to start a new life. But in the end, I was the one who was reborn. He became a nameless shadow, while I became the strongest version of myself. I remember his trembling voice on the phone. "You can't do this, Sandra. You're destroying everything we built." "No, Michael. You're wrong. I didn't destroy anything. I simply returned to you the exact feeling you gave me: helplessness, loss, emptiness. You thought I would fall apart. But in the end, you were the one left broken, and I walked forward, steady, unshaken head held high. Now every morning when I wake up, I see a different woman in the mirror, one no longer defined by a husband or a past. I am wholly myself, strong, sovereign, and more formidable than anyone ever imagined. And that is the truest justice of all. Michael thought a fake death would give him a fresh start, but in the end, I was the one who was truly reborn. He became a shadow, living and hiding, while I became the strongest woman I've ever known. Revenge wasn't just about justice. It was a journey to reclaim myself, and I did it. He wanted me on my knees in grief, but I walked out of that pain with my head held high, strong, free, and unshaken. That is what true justice looks like, and it was the sweetest victory of my life.